Math for English Majors, a human take on the universal language. And this really stuck out to me because I taught English a little bit. Mainly I taught history, but I would say, I mean, as a student, as a math student, I struggled. But I used to tell my kids all the time, like, you got any history or any English? I got you. Like, I'll support you and all that. I can tutor you. I can give you that support and needs. However, don't ask me any math questions because it's just never been something I was strong in. And so I'm just so curious about how, because they seem like two totally opposite areas. So start with, how can math relate to English?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I definitely want to honor the fact that for a lot of students, they just feel so separate. They really feel far apart. The kind of thinking you're doing in English, where you get to like look at the text and then share your own ideas and kind of branch off in different ways and have a flowing conversation. And then math, which feels often so rigid and narrow. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, no, you had to put your foot in exactly the right place. You had to write your X in exactly the right spot and do exactly this thing. It feels, yeah, it feels much narrower, I think, to most students. So how are they actually connected? What I talk about in the book is that math really is, it's a system of communication. It's for sharing ideas. And the ideas we're sharing in math are kind of funny, very specific sorts of ideas. So the language has been designed in a kind of weird way makes it kind of just the right vehicle, or just the right container for those peculiar ideas we're sharing in math. But basically, it all starts from trying to assign numbers to the world. You look at the world, you either count something out there or you measure something with some kind of measurement device, and then you use calculations to figure out new information that you never could have measured in the first place. One of the classic example is the ancient Greek who wanted to know how big the world was. I don't know what transportation technology was like in ancient Greece, but you're not going to travel all the way around the world trailing a big string behind you to measure it directly. So it's like, okay, what am I going to do? You can measure kind of the length of a shadow in two different places. That's a pretty easy measurement. And then you do some math and you can actually calculate, to a reasonable degree of accuracy. You got it to less than 1% error. How big is the world? So that's sort of the template to me for math. It's taking a little bit of information we have and using it to find new information.
Okay, I got you. So not necessarily, or maybe I'm jumping the gun here because I want to make sure I got a clearer picture of how the two of them relate. Because when I think about math, I think of kind of like what you said there. There's formulas.
Yeah.
I guess technically in English, there's formulas too, like a sentence, for example. You got to have a subject, a noun, those kind of verbs, those kind of things. And I believe you talked something about that in your book. Can you open up about that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we can start with nouns. That's where I start in the book. So, right, in English, noun, person, place, thing, sort of anything we're naming out in the world. And I think actually the etymology of noun like comes from name, basically. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, we're assigning a name to that thing. We call it a tree. And in math, that's basically what numbers are. You've got these quantities, and we need to assign names to them. It's really hard. Actually, I showed in the book if you've got like 17 dots versus 18 dots and you're looking at them, like if they're side by side, you can tell that 18 is larger, but there's no way you'd ever, if you were looking at a bunch of pictures with 17 and then 18 and then 22 and then 14, you'd never be able to keep track of how many each one has. So we need to give names to those numbers. You can't count one by one every time. And so the story I start with in the book is I was hiking in Wales. Actually, I lived in England for a little while and was hiking there and came across this really cool plaque that just had on the hillside that showed the numbers in Welsh from like 1 to 20. And you can kind of look, say, okay, one was one. And like, okay, that looks kind of like one. And you can kind of get to 10. And then you can see 11 is kind of like 10 and one. So, a lot of languages work like that. 12 is
Mhm.
10 and two. And then 15 was kind of its own weird word. And then it got interesting because 16, the way they name it in Welsh is basically 15 and 1, which like it's not how we call it in English. We call it
Mhm.
16 is more like 10 and 6, but okay, 15 and 1. And then 17 was 15 and 2. And then you get to 18, which in English we call it 10 and 8. And in Welsh, I was expecting it to be like, okay, that's 15 and 3. But it's not. It's duna, which is double nines, two nines, which is like when I saw like when I tell that to people, the two reactions are either, oh, that's really cool. That's a neat way to say 18. Because it is like 18 is two nines. So like you're playing baseball, you got nine guys on one side, nine on the other side. Yeah, that's 18. And other people are like, that's crazy. You can't do that. You can't just change the naming system in the middle. And I think both those reactions are right, actually. That like, that is a cool way to say 18. That's if you're talking about the number 18, if we were just giving names to things, that's a nicer way to talk about 18, to say, oh, look, it's made up of two nines. But on the other hand, everything else is based on 10. And so it's much harder as a kid to learn a naming system where what it's based on is changing. Imagine if you had to like know exactly what the factors of every number were, and just in order to be able to count, it's more complicated. It's harder to learn. Anyway, so even just with numbers, even with counting, you've got this naming system that's designed for a lot of different purposes, but among them, one is ideally to be easy to learn. And another one is like the naming system should make it easy to add and subtract numbers, which ours does a pretty good job of. 27 plus 32, you add the 20 and the 30, you add the 7 and the 2, and you can kind of come up just by moving around the names, come up with what the sum should be.
Okay.